Have you ever gotten in trouble? I mean, these things are illegal. I mean, have you ever gotten caught?
Yeah, so I used to be able to say no, but I have now been detained. I was in Miami last year for Art Miami. Sorry, for Art Week. It was like 2 in the afternoon. We were just walking, and so I was out with my wife. She's kind of spotting for me, and she kind of gave me the sign to drop what I was doing. But the cop had already seen me and spun the car around, and so yeah, he
Yeah.
got me, he handcuffed me fairly tightly, put me in the back of the car. So to give some context, I'm doing an art form called wheat paste, where you basically print out artwork onto paper and you affix it with like a wallpaper paste. And so it's relatively low damage. And eventually I was like, hey, if I can remove it, can I go? And the guy was like, he's trying to like play bad cop. And he was like, if you can take it down, you can go free. But if you can't, you're going to jail. And I get out and I like, whoop, like it's still wet. I like take the piece right off the wall and I crumple it up. And he's like, okay, you're free to go. And just we'd gotten more, as I mentioned, I used to go out, 2 to 4 in the morning. And then I actually figured out that it was better to go out at like 6 or 7 in the morning because people assume you have permission when you do it in the daylight and they assume that you don't in the evening.
Okay, welcome back to the MO podcast. Our guest today is Fnnch, a remarkable artist known for his innovative approach to street art, blending contemporary styles with playful, thought-provoking imagery. You've likely seen his iconic honey bears on the streets of San Francisco, St. Louis, in windows around the world, on beautiful products at Williams-Sonoma, and beyond. Fnnch regularly uses his art to raise money for charities. Today, we're diving into one of Fnnch's most ambitious projects yet, his solar bridge at this year's Burning Man. Fnnch has brought a number of awe-inspiring installations to the playa, and his work continues to push the boundaries of creativity and sustainability. Today, we'll explore his journey, his vision for Solar Bridge, and how Burning Man has shaped his artistic evolution. Fnnch, welcome to the MO podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So very excited to talk about the Solar Bridge, amazing project, but there's no question you're most well known for your Honey Bear series, the Honey Bear Hunt, murals all over San Francisco, St. Louis, and elsewhere. So before we dive into this year's Burning Man installation, maybe you could tell our listeners a little bit about your history as an artist and the inception and journey of the Honey Bears.
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't get into making street art because I thought it would somehow be a career. I sort of stumbled my way this direction over some number of years. So the first thing that happened was that I moved to San Francisco. And I think at that point, I had already been following some international street artists online, people like Banksy or Shepard Fairey and Vader. And there was a strong scene in San Francisco at some point in the 90s. And I moved here in 2011. And a lot of those early players had either moved out of the city or they moved into gallery and museum work. And so I just didn't see the kind of art that I was seeing online that was really inspiring me. And so, I decided I wanted to be the change I wanted to see in the world. And I went out at 2 in the morning and I started basically painting on public property. And so the first project was in a park. I did some stuff in the Muni, sidewalks, things like that, like mailboxes. And the work itself sort of evolved over time, but I've always been interested in pop art in general. I'm a big fan of Warhol, and I guess you can even call a lot of street art pop art, really. Like something like Banksy is fairly pop. And I was interested in color. And so, yeah, the work sort of evolved. The Honey Bear came about, frankly, fairly randomly. It wasn't, people think it was like the first thing I did, and it wasn't the first, it wasn't the second, it wasn't the third. I think it was only the fifth street art project I did. And I just put it on a park wall in Noe Valley, which was a very family-friendly neighborhood in San Francisco. And the response to that was much stronger than the response to the other work that I'd done. And I've had this experience across a few avenues of my life. I call it the boom theory, where it's like you don't get to know, I don't believe you get to know in advance what's going to work. You just kind of do something that you think is good and you throw it out there and you listen. And either like you hear a boom or you don't. And generally, if you don't, like it's never going to work, no matter how much you work on it. It's hard to turn a failure into a success. But sometimes you hear something back, and even if it's very faint, like I didn't make a living from my art for maybe 4 more years after the first Honey Bear. But the response was still like, huh, this is interesting. And it kind of induced me to do more of them. And so I went out in the Mission where I was living then, and I painted them on some mailboxes, and people liked those, but then it felt too much like graffiti because it was just the classic bear, just the normal honey bear. And so that's what kind of led to the idea of putting them into outfits. So I did a pirate bear and a baker bear, and then it was just hats for a while, and then sort of over time it's evolved. And something I didn't appreciate until much later, again, that it's kind of just stumbled into, is that the bear becomes sort of an avatar for you in a way where, like, if you're interested in cooking, then the chef bear appeals to you, right? And there are certain, if you're interested in skiing, then the skier bear appeals to you. And so they can sort of represent aspects of someone's personality or appeal to hobbies, interests, etc. I don't know if that answered your question. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a good segue into this idea that, you've used the bears quite a lot for sort of social causes and raising money and things like that for various charities or causes. And it's because you can put a firefighter outfit on the bear and it makes sense and people want to buy that. They realize that some portion of that is going to support, an organization. Can you tell us a little bit about your sort of use of the bears for fundraising and things like that?
Yeah, you got that pretty much exactly right. And again, this was not something that I realized in advance. It's something I sort of stumbled into. The very first one I did was the pink pussy hat bear. And, we had just gone through the defunding of Planned Parenthood or whatever. And a friend of mine was like, you should do something. And I was like, what should I do? She's like, I don't know, you've got a platform, people look at what you do, do a thing. And I was like, okay, cool. And so I designed the pussy hat and I put it on the bear. And then, I use that to raise money for charity, in this case for Planned Parenthood. And, I think as you've pointed out, I think I've had more success doing this over time because unlike most nonprofit auctions that you see, where there's a lot of times where art is auctioned off, say, to raise money for some nonprofit. It's extremely common. I donate paintings actually to a lot of nonprofits for this reason. But the paintings aren't generally related to the nonprofit at all. It's cool, I get to buy something maybe at a discount or maybe not, or maybe I get to buy it with pre-tax dollars or maybe not, or whatever, where I know that the proceeds are going to a nonprofit, but it doesn't create that emotional connection. And so, yeah, I mean, I did a couple over time. Yeah, I did one for firefighters after the big fire season here, and Smokey Bear in a similar vein. And then it was really in the pandemic, I did a bear with a mask and a bear that was like a soap container. It was supposed to be hand sanitizer or soap, had a little spout on his head. And that's when it really took off. I think I might have donated over $100,000 in the first fundraiser I did with those. And, one is that it's people being interested in doing something. And two, it sort of marks a point in time and tells that story. And so, yeah, I've done, I don't know how many now. If I had to guess, maybe 15 or 20 over time that are related to different causes. And some with more success than others. But yeah, it's become sort of part of my practice. And I felt, especially during the pandemic, I felt that I had an opportunity. It's like something was being offered to me, a gauntlet or a cup or something. And it's I can reject it and go about my regular program, but it's not offered to everybody, right? I had an opportunity to do something to help the community that most people don't have that opportunity. And so it felt sort of not like it was an obligation, but a privilege even to be able to pick that up and be okay, cool. I happen to be in this position. I happen to be able to do this, let's do it.
Can I ask a question about that first bear and what you just talked about in terms of hearing something go boom? In that first moment in the bear that you painted in Noe Valley, what was the nature of that boom? How did you measure that response, or how was it received in actuality? Because it's one thing to just be able to say this thing, it turned out to be pretty popular, but I think, how was it that you saw it getting attention, or that you realized that you were onto something?
Yeah, so I have three memories of this, and they all might seem sort of small now, but at the time seemed very big. So one was I just went back to go hang out and see what people would do. And there were a lot of children in Noe Valley, and there were just like hordes of children just screaming at it, like, honey bear, honey bear. I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then I actually have a photo of this where a kid like demanded that her mom stop and take a photo of her in front of it. So I have a photo of the mom taking a photo of the kid. Um, and yeah, that seemed interesting. And then the third thing was that like an Instagram influencer posted it to her page, and they didn't drive me like a lot of followers, or I don't even think I signed it. Yeah, but it was sort of like, this person has given this thing this attention. That photo actually ended up without my permission in a book at like Urban Outfitters, which is like super classic, by the way. Not that I have any beef, it's fine. But yeah, so like those were the three things I remember. And again, now you might be like, oh yeah, cool. Some kids were happy and an influencer posted it. Like that doesn't seem like much, but at the time that was markedly different than the other responses I had been seeing, and made me think, oh, okay, cool. Maybe it's worth doing, something else with this, or
Got it.
seeing where it might go.
Had you, up to that point, had you kind of stalked some of the other work that you had done as well after it was finished to see if there was any public response to it?
Yeah, oftentimes I'm just going back for photos. Honestly, it's just like you do it at night and then you come back in the day.
Right.
At that time, I was painting, somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning, and so the photos don't turn out great. And so you just kind of come back and yeah, you hang around and see what people do. And a lot of it to me, part of the appeal of street art is this idea that like you're walking down the street. It's not meant to be some life-changing experience. It's meant to be like you're walking down the street and you look over and you see something and it brightens your day, and you feel a little bit better, and then you realize that that person risked arrest to do that for you, right? And that there's sort of like a caring for people aspect to it, and an enhancing of the environment in ways that I feel like we can be in boxes. And I've tried many times and have many times worked through, let's call it the system, be that with governments or whatever, large property owners, and there's a lot of things you can't do. And I think we live a poor life because we just can't get to yes on things that just make a lot of sense. And so, that's kind of the feeling I'm trying to evoke. And so with the other pieces, people definitely appreciated them. They would look at them, maybe they'd smile, but it wasn't like hordes of children screaming at them.
Right.
Fnnch, you mentioned you didn't sign that first honey bear. It just makes me think, where did the name Fnnch come from?
Fnnch was my nickname in middle school. And when I wanted to start, it's really hard to name something. You, as founders of a company, can appreciate that. I'm sure you had some deliberations. And I actually was stuck enough on a name that I just started doing the art without it. I was like, I'll just come up with a name later. And there's actually, you can track down a photo somewhere of a piece that I did that was signed Fnnch, because it hadn't settled on the double N spelling yet. So there were a couple of different options that I had. The bird theme is one that's close to my family. My mother's side of my family makes a lot of bird related artwork and craft work. And I'd already had this nickname Fnnch. It was only used in middle school. It wasn't used afterwards, but it had been a thing I was called. And then I was convinced that what I wanted was a way to dialogue with people anonymously, where I could sign it and then people could come and talk to me about it or find me. And I didn't want to use any special characters. Like the kind of techie way to do it would be to put, an underscore or some numbers, right? You see a lot of street art names with numbers. So that's also related to like 3D things. But so yeah, that was kind of my goal. And I was convinced that the way to do that would be Twitter. And so I basically just tried spellings of things around what I wanted until I got a Twitter handle. And it turned out that Fnnch was not taken. There's no vowel in it. I joke I'm too poor to buy a vowel. If I knew I was going to become a professional artist, maybe I would have picked some sort of a nonsense phrase that was easy to pronounce and had a full vowel, but people tend to get it and people don't seem to mind. But the good news is once I got the Twitter handle, this would have been 2013. So Twitter had already been around for a couple of years. So all the good handles were already squatted. So once I got the Twitter handle, if you could get that, I was able to get Fnnch.com, unregistered, right? I just paid the standard $15 for it, whatever. Like it was available on every platform. And so I just kind of swept across. And the thing I hadn't anticipated was that Instagram would actually be the place where people would dialogue with me and where art would find more resonance. It was out then, it was pretty new. I wasn't that aware of it. But yeah, but that kind of ended up being the place. But I was convinced that it was going to be Twitter. So
Was Fnnch the name that your friends or your enemies in middle school used?
friends. Yeah. I hope they were friends.
So for those people listening and not watching on YouTube, you asked us if you could have an avatar instead of being on camera, going back to sort of this anonymity aspect. Is that because your roots as an artist were in street art, where it's maybe legally ambiguous or downright illegal to put the art where you put it, or are there other reasons why you like to remain anonymous?
Yeah, so that is 100% why I started that way. It seems like a bad idea to sign your legal name to something that is entirely illegal. And I don't think I did a single work that was legal for at least 2 years. So it was just exclusively street art. And that was the point when someone would actually trust me to paint something on their wall with permission. And then I was able to do the kind of politicking to get to that point. Over time, I had a period where I did a lot less street art. Once I started getting opportunities to do murals in San Francisco, I kind of went that way. Now I do actually a little bit more of it because whenever I travel, I do it. It's just too hard to arrange to paint murals in other places. And so it kind of remains a part of my practice. And like I was in Tokyo last year, like putting up illegal work. Like if they catch me for doing that, they can ban me from the country for life. So not an outcome I want. I like Japan. I want to go back, preferably many times. And so it serves some purpose there. But over time, I've thought about dropping the anonymity, and ultimately, the hurdle to get over is that it's a one-way street. Like you drop it once, and then you can never go back. And so, oftentimes it's easier. And then there's some peripheral benefits. It gives you extra privacy. So there was a point in San Francisco when my profile became much larger, and I don't. At least unless I'm painting a mural, don't have to interact with people randomly. And that has some benefits to it. I can kind of just like live my life and do my thing and, not be worried about it.
Yeah. I mean, we just released an episode with an interview with Jewel. And one of the things she said was that she really didn't like how famous she became. So she started taking 2 years between albums and kind of purposefully killing a bit of her momentum just to kind of keep it at a more manageable level for herself. Have you ever gotten in trouble? I mean, these things are illegal. I mean, have you ever gotten caught?
Yeah. So I used to be able to say no, but I have now been detained. I was in Miami last year for Art Miami. For Art Week, or Basel. And we came out early, did what we normally do, go out at 6 a.m, put up some pieces in Wynwood. That was good. Went about the week. Later in the week, we went back to Wynwood to go kind of putz around. Like, well, as long as we're walking around, got some more pace in my backpack. And we're basically starting on the outskirts of Wynwood, walking inwards. And what I didn't realize, which I would when I actually got to the center, was that there's cops everywhere. When I was there in 2015, I actually saw people tagging murals that were being painted. So like someone would be up on a lift and then some graffiti writer would come in and wreck the mural down below. And I think it's so good. The tourism and the murals are so positive for the community that they've just decided to bring in like an unbelievable amount of law enforcement. And so, yeah, it was like 2 p.m. We were just walking. And so I was out with my wife. She's kind of spotting for me, and she kind of gave me the sign to drop what I was doing. I just put everything on the ground and walk away. But the cop had already seen me and spun the car around. And so, he got me, he handcuffed me fairly tightly, put me in the back of the car. But he took my ID, but he didn't run it. He didn't like punch it into the system. And so I know I'm not going to get arrested, right? And it's like, what I'm doing isn't that big of a deal. So to give some context, I'm doing an art form called wheat paste. where you basically print out artwork onto paper and you affix it with like a wallpaper paste. And so it's relatively low damage. It's relatively fast. So that's why it's a bummer to get caught, just bad luck. And I sat there for a while, and eventually I was like, hey, if I can remove it, can I go? And the guy was like, he's trying to like play bad cop. And he was like, if you can take it down, you can go free. But if you can't, you're going to jail. And I was like, okay. And I get out and I like, whoop, like it's still wet. I like take the piece right off the wall and I crumple it up. And he's like, okay, you're free to go. And I'm like, sweet, I think we're done with the week pace before the trip. And we'd gotten more, as I mentioned, I used to go out, 2 to 4 in the morning. And then I actually figured out that it was better to go out at like 6 or 7 in the morning, because people assume you have permission when you do it in the daylight, and they assume that you don't in the evening. And then, eventually you get more and more bold where, at first you're trying to find places where there aren't a lot of people. And then, I was just in Berlin and I have this photo of me. Basically, there's 2 bars full of people. And there's this woman standing a foot from me talking to a guy. And I'm just putting up a wheat paste, but be a foot away from her. And she just can't even be bothered. Like, she cares so little that she doesn't even look over what I'm doing. Or maybe the guy is just very appealing. So eventually you kind of fly closer and closer to the sun, and it's good to have some sense of where the boundary is, right?
Yeah.
Like there is a point when you will be detained. But I'd gotten the advice. There's an artist named Eddie Kala who is a street artist based in Oakland. I'm not sure if he's still there, but he was at least there for a long time. And I met him relatively early in my street art career. And I asked him, have you ever been arrested? And he said, arrested, no, detained, yes. And he basically said, can I curse on this podcast?
Sure.
Totally.
Okay. Yeah. So what he said is your chances of being arrested are directly proportional to how much of an asshole you are. So he's like, don't run. Like, if you run, they're going to chase after you. They're going to get you. They're going to rough you up a little bit, and then they're going to put you in jail. Just like stand there, talk to them, be polite, be cordial, keep your hands where they can see them. And like, you're probably going to be okay. So that's exactly what I did. I was like as nice as I possibly could be. The cop was mean cop, but again, I knew pretty much instantly that I wasn't going to go to jail, because he would definitely punch in my ID to his computer if that was going to be the case.
Funny. I saw there was a video documentary that I can't recall now, but it was about kind of early days of street art, and there's this hilarious scene where Shepard Fairey gets caught by the cops, but the scene is essentially like there's a cop or a couple of cops, and they're like, hey, you come over here. And so Fairey begins with that advice where he's like very polite and sort of starts like walking over towards the cops and is talking to them, and then at some moment he just bolts. And the cops are sort of standing there like, wait a second, what just happened? But it's like he was like as if he was going to play ball, and then boom, he's just like booking out of the frame. And it is so funny because it's just like this practiced or like very well rehearsed moment where he's like, I know I can outrun these foot cops in New York or wherever he was doing his work at the time. And better for me just to like get out of here and not have to get like another citation or whatever it's going to be than to do it. But it is definitely an image that has been stamped in my brain for what it was like to be an early street artist.
That's awesome.
It seems like being detained is just like a rite of passage, right? Like it's almost like until that happens, you're just kind of waiting for the day that you are like anointed as like a true street artist because now you've been caught.
Yeah. I mean, I prefer not to be, all things considered.
Amazing. All right. Well, Fnnch, thanks for all the colorful background. But let's talk about the project of the year here. This year at Burning Man, you installed a project you're calling the Solar Bridge. Rather than me butcher a description of it, why don't you tell us what is the Solar Bridge?
So I'll begin just by describing it, and then I can explain the thought process behind it. So it is an arch that's 13 feet tall and 26 feet wide. It's sort of geometric in nature. There's 7 sides to it, and the outside of it is solar panels, and the underside of it is lighting. And what I had not seen at Burning Man before, or frankly anywhere, is an artwork that uses solar as part of the art itself. Like it's aesthetically integrated into the artwork. It has been done. I have found examples of it online. There's sort of a pavilion in DC like this. There's a pyramid in Canada. So it's not a truly novel idea. But Burning Man has a lot of, they're working on sustainability practices, which is, it seems counterintuitive because it is in some ways a hilariously wasteful event. But it is sort of a frontier environment where there's a lot of experimentation going on, and a lot of stuff actually comes back to what we call the default world. Yeah, and so the genesis of the idea was my piece from the year before. I did a piece I called Nothing for Sale, and it was the world's largest tube man, wacky waving inflatable tube dude, like the thing at a car wash. So I built one of those that's 60 feet tall. And one of the principles of Burning Man is decommodification. And so he said nothing for sale on his body. And there was, of course, nothing for sale because there's nothing for sale there. And the Burning Man organization liked the idea enough to put it in Keyhole, which is kind of the plaza in front of Center Camp. It's probably the most prominent art location on the playa, which was a blessing and a curse. It was a curse because it really had to work when they told me that I was going to be there. I was like, okay, can't, like usually I come in, 95% sure the piece is going to work. But you can't go to Keyhole and be 95% sure. You have to be 99, maybe a couple nines. So a lot more testing went into it. And the piece was extremely well received. People absolutely loved it. But I ran it off a generator, 5 kilowatts to power the fan. Like none of this is standard stuff, right? So I'm getting like a paint booth fan. And 5 kilowatts running off a generator is about a gallon of gas an hour. And I looked at a solar panel, solar powering it, but it was like, it would have taken, I would have spent more gas trucking the panels to and from the playa than I actually consumed in running the piece. Like it would have been complete greenwashing, basically. And so I was like, this is actually just the greenest way to do this. And the problem with the gallon of gas an hour is that, the generator tank is only 7 gallons. And so we had external tanks. We had 2 of them trying to have gas siphon between them. It never worked. And so I'm there, at least every 8 hours, 24 hours a day, siphoning gas between tanks. And at 1 a.m. coming back from going out on the dance floor, crawling into a box with a running generator and siphoning gasoline. Like not a pleasant experience. So
that's some real Vito Conci shit right there.
It was very frustrating. And so I came back being like, okay, cool. Next year's sculpture is solar powered. And then I just didn't want to do another. Again, usually what you see there is there's an artwork that's lit up. They have to be lit. And if they're of any size, there's just, you go 50 feet away and there's a generator in a box. And so if they are solar powered, that is turned into a solar array and a box for the batteries. And I was like, cool, I can do that, but maybe there's something better I can do. And so that was the idea. The idea of the bridge was supposed to be a metaphor, like a bridge to the future. I am not a subtle artist, as you can see from my work, and I should have just called it Solar Arch. So maybe I will just rebrand it the Solar Arch, because it is in fact an arch. It is not in fact a physical bridge.
That's what struck me the first time I looked at it, was that I thought, wow, it's really beautiful. I mean, the pictures are awesome. And I thought, this is such a cool example of how solar could be integrated into city life and the world in a way that doesn't have to be, just these ugly panels on the side of a wall or of a building or whatever. It really is. It feels like a great example of how that could. And was that sort of part of what you were hoping it could be? Is to serve as an example of how solar panel can be, part of the aesthetic instead of
absolutely.
an obstruction of.
That's the bridge concept.
Right.
Yeah, is that I'm not trying to be a destination, but I'm trying to point the finger and be like, hey, maybe this-ish way there's something interesting. And there's a lot of interesting solar technology. And there's translucent solar panels. Obviously, we've seen even the Tesla solar roof, that's like roof tiles, is something that is aesthetically, I think, superior to the panels on your roof. Now, the panels on your roof are terrible, but I'm seeing things now with solar fencing. So there's a lot of interesting things on the horizon, and art can be part of what helps show people the way, right? Obviously, I'm doing it for aesthetic reasons. Something else that is interesting to me is that when you place something in a park, say, or a square, getting power to the object is a challenge, right? Like there might not be power in the ground to tap into, right? In your yard, whatever, right? And so like you're just running cords everywhere, or maybe there are no cords around, maybe you can't do it. And so having things have their own power is sort of, it's opening up a design space for what you might be able to accomplish in the same way that like a home with solar panels off the grid can have power and be a home, right? Maybe there's other, I guess you see a lot of like on the highway, like call boxes and stuff, right? Like hardly gonna power that call box, well, they just have a little solar panel there. And so there's something about that I find interesting as an avenue for potential exploration.
Yeah. It's interesting because for Solar Bridge, I think, a few technologies have to come into place to make it feasible. Certainly, I imagine like LED lighting, very, very low, basically low energy, high impact, very efficient lighting has to be in place, right? Because otherwise you're generating tons of heat, losing a ton of energy, and the solar panels end up not being able to provide that. And then I'm assuming you had some sort of battery packs as well inside of the bridge to help keep it illuminated.
Yes. Yep. So yeah, you're right on both counts.
And so the availability of battery storage, right, obviously is like that's become the cost of battery storage is going way down, but and there's new technologies on the frontier that are going to make that even more efficient and feasible. I'm curious how much or how big were battery packs did you have to run the solar bridge?
Yeah, so there's 200 pounds of batteries in it.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's two 100-pound batteries, each of which is 5 kilowatt hours. So for 10 total kilowatt hours, which is more than I needed, but I didn't know that.
Right. Yeah.
What did it cost? What did this project cost?
My all-in cost right now, including both, so it's basically 50-50, like cost of materials and hired labor, design services, engineering services, and fabrication. Like I'm not a welder. And so I've someone I work with who I pay to do that. And so it was 40,000 total, 20,000 for the materials and 20,000 for the labor.
And you just funded that yourself?
Yeah, I tried doing actually a fundraiser for it, but it didn't work. So.
And then what's the plan for the solar bridge now? I mean, are you hoping that this gets installed somewhere on a permanent basis, or like what do you hope happens with it?
Yeah, that would be ideal. I'm kind of in discussion right now. I have one site that we need to get some, not city approval, but some approvals for it. But the guy that runs the site is interested in placing it in San Francisco. I'm not ready to share the location right now, but it is a pretty good one. And then I've got a couple other people kind of like kicking the tires of, is this kind of a thing that a property developer might want for their property? Like it's meant to be able to sit around and be pretty for, years. That's how I designed it, and, be waterproof and weatherproof. And like if it can survive at Burning Man, it can survive a fair number of places. And so it's possible that someone will, so either I'll place it somewhere in San Francisco on like a loan basis and see how long it runs, or someone will buy it. And I'm, kind of still sussing out which of those will manifest, or both.
I was going to say, I mean, do you have any interest in making more than one? If you have multiple people who are interested in this, would you manufacture more than one?
Yeah. So yes, and it wouldn't necessarily have to be an arch. It could be. There's other versions of the arch that are interesting, but I probably had 8 different shape ideas that I made 3 models of. And so, this is sort of an aspect of my art practice that I think of hitting I feel like I either aim to hit a single or I aim to hit a home run. And the good thing about hitting a single, I guess it's not a great metaphor in some ways because it's actually really hard to hit a single in baseball. But but imagine, but it's at least, in this analogy, right? It's a thing. I know it's a bunt. Work.
It's a bunt or a home run.
Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, it's a bunt or a home run.
It's a bunt or a home run.
So there's a lot of projects I do that I know how to do them. I know they're going to work, right? And I need to have projects like that because I am a professional artist. I have costs of my own. I have a studio. I have studio assistants, right? Whatever, utilities, etc. So there's just costs associated with my practice, and so only trying to hit home runs is not a very financially savvy thing to do because the home runs fail a lot. but I also kind of like don't like, I don't even know what trying to hit a double or a triple would sort of be, right? It's like, if you're going to go for it, you might as well go for it. And so the context here is that, a solar sculpture is not very Fnnch in some ways. It's not kind of up the middle, kind of pop art, representational, bright colors. But it is something that interests me. And, I feel like being an artist, you just should do things that interest you. And I thought that, look, maybe people will really like this. And I could see this being a thing that goes into, like like a roundabout or a town square in a small town, or somebody's, property in wine country that just, wants to put something out in the field that's cool. And so I'm going to kind of let that manifest, like I've taken my swing, I spent money and put time and did a lot of learning and built this thing. And, it got to go to Burning Man. And so maybe like that it's fulfilled its purpose in some sense. But, in my ideal world or my most optimistic world, someone would be like, oh, hey, actually, we really love this idea. Could you do another shape, another thing? And, it could maybe be another part of my practice is designing and building solar sculptures.
Yeah, it's interesting. It is a very aesthetically, it's a departure from a lot of your work, given it kind of abstract, kind of more symbolic, more elliptical in its the ways that it can mean things for people versus even the balloon man, or the fan figure is is like this, like, strangely iconic in contemporary culture, and then of course the bears and everything else.
Yeah, the way I thought about this is, I kind of felt like I've earned the privilege to do other things. Like kind of like, what's the point of being an artist if you're just going to do what the market most rewards or whatever? I didn't feel like that was going to push forward my art practice. And I kind of felt like, okay, I'm interested in doing it. Let's just do it and let's just see how it goes. And maybe it won't work because it's too far away from my current audience, right? And so I'm just not going to have the kind of people who would collect a thing like this, on my mailing list or following my Instagram or whatever. But at some level, I care, but I kind of don't care. Like I don't. It doesn't have to work, right? It's not like I've put a mortgage on my house to build this sculpture. Like, it's a reasonable thing for me to do within the context of my art practice. And I kind of feel like just doing, like, what's the point of being an artist if you're just going to do, the same thing over and over again? I don't know.
Right. And how? Sorry, go ahead, Joey.
I was just gonna say, do you think then, Fnnch, of I mean, obviously, you still talk about the project, to your mailing list and on your website and on your Instagram and all these things. But do you feel like, hey, this is Burning Man and I can do things at Burning Man that fall outside of what people might expect from me from an artist, but, maybe this isn't a project I would do at home just for like some kind of local installation? Do you feel like Burning Man kind of gives you permission to just branch out or do crazy things, and not feel like they necessarily have to fit into the confines of what people expect from your practice?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, in reality, I only build sculptures for Burning Man. So I've built 7 sculptures or whatever, and that's 7 years there. A lot of those sculptures are bear related, right? But it's not like I build sculptures as part of my regular art practice. I would, but it's kind of, what people appear to want to buy from me are paintings, and I make a lot of paintings, and, maybe I'm most skilled in making paintings. But yeah, it was just, that's what kind of got me in the idea of making a sculpture at all, and kind of just pulling on the thread of that and seeing where it leads. And then the other aspect that's sort of intimately intertwined with Burning Man is that every sculpture is a reaction to the previous one. Like I described how the Tube Man was a reaction to, that the Solar Bridge was a reaction to the Tube Man. Well, the Tube Man was a reaction to an inflatable I did before called the Bot Bears, which were these like inflatable bot bags you can knock over. And, and I went into inflatables because I'd just done a piece in the year before that was giant and heavy and metal and needed to be carried on a flatbed truck. And I saw an inflatable sculpture and I was like, hey, that flatbed truck was, $5,000 round trip and required a forklift on both sides. Like, that sucked. Like, maybe I don't want to build something that weighs 2,000 pounds. And these other guys just like plunk down their giant 70-foot elephant, hit, inflate, and drink beers. I'm like, that is a build plan that I can get behind, right? And so, yeah, you kind of like, you're wandering through, or I'm wandering through like, oh, interesting. Like I reached somewhere that I thought was cool. But then I got there, I'm like, oh, well, maybe I want to, do something different from this. And all of that, of course, is in the context of what can I get out there? What can I build? Like, how quickly can I build it? How quickly can I take it down? Is it going to get abused by people? How robust is it? Right? Will it fall over? Can it withstand 100-mile-an-hour sustained winds? Like, can it be sandblasted? Like, all of the, a lot of the constraints that you need to be artistic within are very particular to that environment, which is a weird, harsh, remote sort of alien landscape.
Yeah, I don't know if you got a chance to check it out, but we have an episode with a gentleman, Bart Van Peel from the Captain Boomer Collective, and they made they've made several now at this point, 50-meter lifelike replica of a beached whale. And they go onto the beach in the middle of the night.
Oh my God.
Drop this 50-meter beached whale on the thing, and they surround it with fencing, and they dress up as scientists, and then they pretend that this thing is a real beached whale, and they're taking samples and trying to figure out what happened to it. And so it's like designed to like spark conversation. And one of the interesting things from that, things that he learned is like the first whale they made was just slightly too big to put into a standard shipping container.
Yes.
And so when they needed to like take this thing somewhere, they had to like split it into more than one piece and like, all these things. So when, now they've made 3 of them, and, every time they're like learning something new and
shipping container friendly pieces now.
Yeah. So now they make it so that it does fit in a standard shipping container. And anyways, it's, so there was a lot of talk on that show about constraints. He needs permits, but if he also has figured out that, asking for forgiveness is better than permission sometimes. And
yeah.
Anyways, lots of interesting stuff there.
Like a lot of art. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So a lot of art is like this, right? I mean, the constraints come about, like, art is creativity within a set of constraints. So at least that's an aspect of art. And, people ask me like, why are the standard honey bear paintings I do 22 inches tall? Well, because a sheet of cardboard, work out my stencils, is 18 by 24. Like, I want to have some buffer. So something to be larger or smaller, or the cardboard didn't collapse. I don't want to cut to the edge, and 22 it is, right? Like, it wasn't like I was, I looked at a wall and thought this was the perfect possible size. It was just, this is what I could cut. And there we go.
Yeah, I think the constraints are like I can't write a poem that doesn't rhyme to save my life.
Yeah.
And I absolutely cannot do it. They're total garbage. But like if I have to rhyme, all of a sudden all this like creativity flows. Like I just find it so much more interesting to like have to try to meet that challenge. So what were you going to say, Jonathan?
Yeah, so Fnnch, I was going to answer your question. So the two things. First, did the solar bridge have the effect or the impact that you were looking for, or maybe a better way of phrasing that is like what was the reception of the work on the playa?
Yeah, so the reception was almost universally positive. I'd go by and I'd see people interacting with it. It wasn't the same. I think the thing that was a surprise to me is that when you make kind of in your face pop art, whatever giant inflatable bears or huge tube men, like people have a certain flavor of reaction to it, that like maybe it's more polarizing, and it's sort of more joyful and playful. And so the kind of reactions here were like, I had 2 people that told me that they thought it was too well built for Burning Man, which is a compliment.
Like not DIY enough.
Yeah, we did. I mean, it's stainless steel and aluminum. We put some good work into it and tried to make it well fabricated. But that's not a compliment I've gotten in the past, is what I would say. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. It's a very weird compliment. But I guess I'll accept that as being positive. But yeah, I mean, I was going for contemplative, right? And, I'd say I saw 2 kinds of reaction. The reaction I didn't expect, which I saw the most, was it became sort of a portal. Like they stationed it right at the end of a street. So Burning Man is this big clock, and there are streets that are radials. And basically it was right where the 4 o'clock street just dumped into the kind of inner playa art area. And so if you're biking in from wherever your camp is to go to whatever's out there for your adventure, it's like a straight shot to bike underneath it. And so sometimes like people would come in mass just to go, like they had to go under this, to kind of begin their adventure or whatever. And so I thought that was nice. But then I also definitely saw people stop, get off their bikes, walk around, spend time with it. I ran 4 2-minute shows, if you will, or patterns with the lights. And so, there was some interest. We weren't sure how long attention spans would be. Like, is the right amount of time for a show, 30 seconds, because we're just like in the social media generation and you can't possibly watch something for 2 minutes. But, no, the goal was to make something that would be more contemplative and relaxed. And so, so that's where I kind of ended up with. Even 2 minutes sounds short as I say it, but it feels like an eternity when you're standing there and there's a dance party somewhere else that you can go to.
Totally. I think the other question that I wanted to lead up to was, so you've done a number of projects at Burning Man. You've been to the playa over a number of years. Now thinking this beyond the frame of your own work, have you witnessed a kind of evolution of what kinds of projects and what kinds of works happen at Burning Man over the years, or is it does it seem like there's a kind of I don't want to call it static, but there's a kind of sort of a range, a more sort of synchronic range of things that get done, and each year there's kind of variations on those various different things, and so it becomes more kind of like a map rather than a history. What's your sense of kind of the overall take on art at the major sort of sculptural work at Burning Man?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I have a couple of angles on this. So one, there definitely is, let's call a Burning Man aesthetic, and it's typically going to be work, either work made from metal, oftentimes found objects, recycled metal, but it's got a certain, can last forever vibe to it, very durable, climbable. Or wood artworks. Obviously, they burn a lot of works, but there's a lot of wood, again, could be recycled or reclaimed from some other source. And that has been and continues, and it's very well suited to the environment. I've been 10 years now, and there have been 38 of them. So, whatever, a quarter of them. So not a crazy amount. But from my first year in 2013 to 2019, before the pandemic, every year was a record year for the number of sculptures brought and the scale of the sculptures brought and the ambition of the sculptures brought. Like, people just kept doing crazier things. And then I also feel like one evolutionary aspect is that Burning Man really is at the frontier of LED and light art. I've been told that the lead lighting designer for the Sphere in Vegas is a burner. He's worked on the temple and other really big projects. And that has been described as maybe sort of the apogee of Burning Man art, just in Las Vegas. But that sort of a vibe, I really think is coming from there. And, LEDs, certainly programmable LEDs, individually addressable LEDs are relatively new. And I think a lot of the frontier of that and the evolution of that, and it continues to go. I mean, maybe we're starting to max out, maybe not. It just turns stuff into a software problem at some point, so you get sort of infinite complexity issue. Right. But yeah, so that's been evolving. And then I'll also say, like, different years, there are pieces. Like, my favorite piece from 2023 were these carbon fiber. They were supposed to look like Japanese fishing lures, and they're maybe, again, like 50 feet tall, and maybe there's 20, 30, 40 of them set maybe 6 feet apart, and they kind of gently bend. And they get thinner and thinner and thinner towards the top, like a fishing lure, and they're sort of painted. I thought they were grass when I first saw them, and they kind of rotate in the wind. And it's very different from your, blinky, like, this is a deeply contemplative space where you're kind of feel like you're communing with nature, or with, it's like incredibly abstract, incredibly minimal. And that isn't something that I'd seen there before, and I found was very striking. So what's nice about Burning Man as an art institution is that people will be like, oh yeah, I brought a piece. So like, oh, congratulations on being selected. I was like, you don't understand. That's not how Burning Man works at all. Like, they're only curating for safety. Like, they do curation on placement. So if they like your piece, they'll place it somewhere closer in, or maybe in a more prominent location to certain landmarks. But anyone can bring a piece, and there is no reason why I should have been trusted to build some of these pieces. Like when I embarked upon them, I did not have the skills to do them, and it was sometimes unclear if the thing would even work. And that's not their job to ascertain that. Like if you're spending a bunch of money on a public project, you should probably vet the artist very carefully to make sure that they can actually accomplish what they have promised you. But out there, they're like, what's your lighting plan and what's your anchoring plan? And they're like, cool, go for it. And I don't know the number, but I bet you 10% of projects don't make it every year. Either they couldn't get made it in advance or they fail on Playa. And so, they are it's more of it's like a functional anarchy, and they're just trying to, keep people safe, somewhat safe, by the way, not totally safe. You can build things out there that are actually quite dangerous. But you're only going to get hurt by making a decision yourself and putting yourself in a position where you can then become hurt. Like you climb a thing that was too tall for your strength, versus like the thing's going to fall over in the wind and crush you.
Right. Much more libertarian, right? It's like,
yes,
they're ensuring against, I can't remember what the philosophical term was, but like, they're like luck consequentialists. It'll do, this thing will nothing's going to happen to you.
Yes.
You are going to happen to yourself.
To yourself, yeah. And so the upshot of this is that while there might be like a Burning Man art like vibe, it's because it's just so open. Like, I started bringing my pieces, and they're very often very different from other pieces. There've been years where I have some of the only pieces in color out there, right? Like I'm the only one actually painting things, and that varies from year to year, but that's just a different thing out there, and and it's not because I'm trying to cohere with the movement. I'm just trying to do things I think are cool, and it's a big stage.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because this idea, your work this year, the other work you said you saw, there's a kind of move towards a more, technological, contemplative versus the kind of iconic and spectacular. It could be an interesting evolution if it ends up sort of taking root, and maybe that has just to do with the kind of a sort of an aesthetic maturation on the part of the people who actually attend Burning Man. And after a certain period of time, there's only so many types of figurative, large scale sculptures of one sort of another, or sort of climbing sculptures or structures that you have. But it'd be, curious, I imagine over time those things will begin to reveal themselves. But certainly, for someone, I have not ever been to Burning Man. I've only ever heard about it, read about it, seen pictures of it. Certainly does seem like it, but at this point warrants its own kind of, historian, and to enter the archive. And some sort of critical take on how it matches or reflects on what's happening with the culture at large, because it certainly seems to be a place that's like otherwise largely neglected by the art world in general.
Yeah, this definitely surprised me. Like when I first got there in 2013, I was like, holy crap, this is like a fully matured art movement of world historical importance. Like interactive by default is like, unless it says don't climb it, you can climb it, right? And really pushing boundaries of ways to interact with things, right? That's why I did the bop bears. Was cool. I've seen things that you can push, that you can roll, that you can spin, that you can climb inside of, and whatever, but I haven't seen something that you can bop, right? So I'm like, I'm going to bring bopping to the Playa, right? And that, again, the scale of the works, just stuff, monumental, LED effects, flame effects, etc. But so like this is me just as I'm not even I guess I went in 2013, so I was already doing the street art, but it wasn't a thing I thought I was going to do professionally. That wasn't until really end of 2016 that kind of came together. But so I guess I understood less about how the formal art world works, at that point than I do now. And it's like, I can't tell if I keep waiting for. I mean, they had a show at the Smithsonian, and they had an auction of works through Sotheby's as a fundraiser during the pandemic, just to help them kind of tide their way over. And there've been these like points, but it hasn't. I haven't seen museums acquiring these pieces, and so, or like sculpture parks like I haven't seen
Right.
big sculpture parks acquiring these things. Some of that is liability concerns. I'm sure I've faced that myself. Some of it is that wood doesn't do well in weather. But there are a lot of pieces that are really pretty remarkable that I think people that are very awe-inspiring and engage the general populace with art. And so I feel like there's room for it. And I used to be very confident that was going to happen. And now I'm maybe it'll happen.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost there's almost a sort of like institutional antithesis to what happens at Burning Man and on the playa. Like it's not necessarily the work that is made to be purely ephemeral, but the sort of ethos of the place is so kind of anti-institutional in a sense, even though Burning Man has kind of become its own institution. But it's, I'd have a hard time seeing how, a museum can think about these things, whereas, so often the sort of conventional art world, holds up a kind of legacy of land art and, work that sort of, or people who made their names in the 1970s and have kind of continued on. I think about Rodin Crater or other works that have that are sort of out there in the desert, and the work that happens in Burning Man is either dismissed as either kind of kitsch or is just spectacular or is something like totally outside of it. Whereas I think everybody that I've talked to who's ever gone, and also just by sheer example from images of what it is that is being produced, deserves so much more recognition and respect than it currently gets from the kind of, let's call it the big city curatorial class. And it really is just a difference in sensibility than it really is from anything anything that could be any kind of cogent argument made from either a historical or a critical standpoint. And I've seen some of, for example, in Las Vegas, I can't remember the sort of Zappos CEO is a big burner and has a kind of some of the sculptures Tony Hsieh, exactly, and some of the sculptures from Burning Man from years ago are sort of installed at one or two of the sites in downtown, old downtown Las Vegas. And so you get a kind of flavor of exactly what you were talking about, those kinds of salvaged metal, permanent works, everything's looks it's poised to have fire breathing of one sort of another. Seems like a medium of Burning Man. But it is a testament to the fact that there's this huge, like it's an enormous production, right? And like the scale of the work that is produced and the numbers of works that are produced every year, it deserves like more attention than it currently gets. Like why there aren't more sort of like teams of, and I count myself as guilty of this as well, but like why the major art magazines or the major journals or even the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or something, doesn't send more journalists out there to cover this thing for a moment, is kind of extraordinary, right? Like the New York Times should have like a big piece that goes over the work that was at Burning Man, the same way that they would do it. But you always get the garbage public work that shows up at Art Basel or something like that. Like, whoa, what was at Art Basel Unlimited in Geneva this year? And you're like, okay, that's just
yeah.
Those are supposed to be monumental works. It's like a handful of well-known artists who do these things. They're all funded by collectors and galleries, and presumably go off to take up residence at an estate in Europe, or in the United States someplace, or in Saudi Arabia, and you're just like, wait a second, there's something that's missing here.
Yeah, here.
Fnnch, I'm curious, like, well, so obviously there's a lot of people who've never been to Burning Man. I've been one time, and when I got there, it's just shocking. I mean, like Jonathan was saying, you get there, it's something that doesn't get talked about the same way that the Whitney Biennial gets talked about, or any of these things. And then you get there, and just the sheer magnitude of the amount of art and stuff there is just sort of mind blowing. I mean, even you're out at 4 o'clock in the morning and there's LED just completely surrounding you, and it's But I hate to do this to you, but can you explain, for people who haven't been to Burning Man, like what's your experience going for the first time? And then what's how is the difference, and in particular, like the community aspect of it, different for you now that you go and are one of the artists building something big on the fly? Like, explain what it's like for a normal person, and then explain how it's different for you, when you're participating in the building of a big monument.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think one thing people misunderstand about Burning Man is that, like a city, which it's the third largest city in Nevada when it's there. It's, there's not just one San Francisco, right? There's an art San Francisco, and there's a music San Francisco, and there's a tech San Francisco, and there's a coffee San Francisco, and there's a fine dining San Francisco, right? And these worlds all live on top of each other, and people will move in multiple of those worlds, but some of them are more aligned than others. And so there's a couple of things going on out there. It's the world's largest sculpture event, world's largest outdoor sculpture event. There's about 400 pieces every year that are built basically brand new. What shocked me for my first year and my second year is that they basically don't come back. Like, nobody just brings a work back again, which I thought might happen. Sometimes they're remixed, but say that's 1 or 2 a year. It's also, if you're into electronic dance music, which I am only mildly into, it is a whole thing for that. There's some famous DJs like Diplo and Skrillex, whatever, who play, but then there's all sorts of other, I didn't realize there were so many subgenres, minimalist house, whatever. There's people coming over from Europe, and there's all these different vibes, and they even have their own sort of Burning Man kind of electronic music, lower tempo, tribal, whatever. So there's people that just wake up every day at 4 p.m. or 5 p.m., eat their breakfast, and then go spend all night awake and go out to the dance floors and to the parties, and don't even interact with the daytime version of Burning Man. So it's an art festival, it's a music festival, if you want to call it that. And then it's sort of this like, maybe after that, you'd say it's like, I'm gonna call it like a speaker series. Though there is a speaker series, but camps have offerings like classes. There's a whole book of classes that you could take. And that's everything from, meditation and, personal presence to, introduction to some kind of, BDSM knot tying or whatever. It's like the camps just went off or whatever they're going to offer. Introduction to composting, like whatever. So there's thousands of those kinds of classes going on, and you can navigate your way there. And then maybe the last thing is that it's like a social experiment in a way. They have these 10 principles, which were actually intended to reflect the culture, not dictate the culture. And so decommodification, which I mentioned before, is one of them. So there's no money, there's no barter. People think that there's barter because there's no money. There's no barter. You just give things. Yeah. So gifting is one of the principles. You bring things to give to other people. And then radical self-reliance is one of the principles. Basically, everybody brings everything that they need and doesn't rely on anybody for anything. And it turns out when you do that, you can have a society with a lot of generosity, because like there's no freeloader problems. Because it's a lot of things. I can't give you a really succinct explanation of. I think your first year, you kind of come in and you're overwhelmed by all these things, and you try to find where your interest is. So one of the things I realized my first year is I was told I would need to gift things, or should gift things, and I just made a guess at what I should gift. So I brought like a handle of Jack Daniels and an eighth of weed, being like, probably someone want these things. I found out that nobody wanted these things. Like, one, because there's like 5 governmental agencies out there, and it's on national land. Nobody's really smoking marijuana from flower, and so not a thing anybody wanted. And 2, there's so much booze there. Like, the most common gift that a camp can have is a bar, and so there's just bars everywhere. There's people with megaphones trying to shout you down, like, you look thirsty. Like, we've got drinks. Like, come in here and have a drink. And so the idea of bringing more booze to the event, so that was like a total whiff. And the next year I brought like throat lozenges and beef jerky, which is much closer to what people actually want. A little bit of protein in the desert goes a long way, and the dustiness could get to you. But even still, after the second year, I'm like, I am net receiving in some very substantial way, right? And so I just need to find a way to gift that's more significant, because you can come in the beginning and you're like, you can still participate in some humble ways, through your outfit, or through minor gifts, or helping out at a camp or whatever. But at some point you realize that if you want to be part of this thing, right? Like it's all made by the people. Like there's nobody being paid. I mean, the Burning Man organization have some staff, but they're there for like people. The folks who are paid are like building the roads, servicing the porta potties, right? They're not like doing any music, not doing any art. And so the org builds one sculpture every year, which is the man, and that's it. And the other 399 are being brought by individuals, sometimes with no support. Maybe 20 of them get some financial support from the organization, from Burning Man. But anyway, so you're like, look, I got to do something. And some people feel called to go do music. Some people feel called to go, serve food. But what seemed to me is like, I'm an artist, like maybe I should bring an artwork. And so it doesn't, like, I wouldn't say that, I guess it feels good to go. And when you talk to people and they're asking about yourself, you're like, yeah, I built that thing over there. And then they recognize that you are contributing to the event in some way that is meaningful. But I wouldn't say, it's not like there's like classes of people where you're like, oh, cool, you're in the artist class and, people are going to hold you up to some higher bar, because other people might be doing things that you don't know about that are also very significant. And so, but yeah, I mean, definitely, like, I think it's more of a personal feeling, and like, it's very hard for me to make any kind of financial justification for why building art for Burning Man makes sense. You could say it's marketing, or you could say what you could sell things or whatever. I think when I actually look at the whole of what the time I've spent and the money I've spent and the work I've put in, there's no way it makes any sense. But that's not the point, right? Like the point of doing it is that, like, I actually believe in the project and I believe in the idea of gifting. And if you believe in the event, I believe in the 10 principles, and I think that they, produce an interesting outcome and can teach us things that maybe can be brought back afterwards. And so, to me, it's just like, I get to do a thing out there every year. I get to make my contribution. And even if it doesn't make sense in some larger context, I sort of try to carve aside this part of my year to be a very good participant.
I feel like there's if you go to Burning Man with like an agenda, it's really like the worst possible thing, right? If your agenda is to just go and give and whatever, I mean, but like if you have like an angle, right? Like I've only been one time, and at the time I was in the process of fundraising for Inversion Art, and my friend was supposed to come visit me in Mexico. He said, nah man, let's go to Burning Man instead. And I was like, what? Like, I can't afford that, and also like I need to be raising money for my company. He goes, dude, there's no place where more money gets thrown around in the name of art than Burning Man. Like everybody there has like money that they're literally lighting on fire. Like you should come, it'll be a great place for you to meet people who are really into art and have money to give away. I was only there for like an hour, and I was like, dude, I'm not going to talk to anyone here about, investing in my company. Like, this is the worst environment possible for having any sort of business discussion. It would just feel like totally filthy and dirty to be out there like with some kind of like, agenda or angle. It's just not the place for that at all. And you realize it like right away.
Yeah. So like, I like commerce. I think it's great, but it can be utterly exhausting. Right? Like you walk out your door, you don't even have to walk out your door. You look at your computer, somebody's selling you something everywhere. And it just gets, I don't think until you step away from it into an environment where there is no commerce, for a little bit, it's not that it's intended to be a model that we should give up commerce and go back to everyone hunting and gathering for themselves and, no barter even. But yeah, it's interesting to step away. And yeah, like nobody talks about their work, generally speaking. No one's like, I mean, I'm in San Francisco, right? Everyone's like, what do you do? Right? Like your job is your personal identity, right? And out there, like no one's like, what do you do? Right? So yeah, like it's not that you couldn't meet a person out there who you just happen to become friends with from having some unique experience, and then you come back to the default world and it turns out that they're an investor. Like, that's certainly a thing that is possible, but it'd be a way more roundabout path of having that happen. And yeah, I think if you tried to push for it, you would get ostracized from the community.
No, 100%. And even, like you said, it's like you get out there and for the first time, perhaps ever, you are in this place that is commerce free, and it feels kind of sacred. Like, wow, this is really special. And I don't want to be the person who's out here trying to sell something, even if it's, not right here, right now, you just,
Yeah,
it's just not appropriate. It's sort of,
it takes everybody together.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
the thing I've come to believe is that there are no permanent utopias. There are only temporary utopias. And just because I think people try to lambast the event because of its temporary nature and how the things like, well, they don't work in the real world or whatever. And it's like, cool, maybe that's true. But I mean, this is not the only temporary utopia. Like, you go on a beach trip or something, like you can be out there in the palm trees with your umbrella drink. You can't live there forever, right? Like you wouldn't be happy doing it. The systems of society don't function, right? But it doesn't mean that you can't, or like a meditation retreat, or there's other ways that we can try to approximate this. But this is, I think, what's going on out there to some degree is that we're trying to build a utopian type society for 7 days, or and that's it's going to start fraying at the edges, pretty quickly after that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because it's it's an environment that, like, I think your idea, this sort of temporary and utopia is important because it requires these links of kind of logistics and resources to a different space, right?
Yes.
And so, the supply lines, the roads, the money that is spent off-site outside the playa the rest of the year, the jobs that are had doing whatever in order to support the 7 days of of alternative social experimentation, all of that is integrated, right? It's kind of part of a a kind of biology with its kind of links into one thing or
Yes.
another, and it sort of evolves over time. So it's an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, there's a joke I make. So one of the principles is leave no trace. And
Right.
the event is actually held to the highest leave no trace standard in the world. The Bureau of Land Management comes in. I think if it's 1 square meter of trash for 1 square kilometer of land, then you have to walk the entire thing again, person to person, shoulder to shoulder, and clean it. But it's leave no trace there. It's not leave no trace in Reno, right? Like, yeah, I pick up every last piece of trash that I produce, right? But if I'm eating a food bar and I have a plastic wrapper, like that goes in my backpack, that goes in a trash bag, that goes in my truck,
Right.
and it gets trucked back, and it ends up in a trash can somewhere, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And so, yeah,
That would be like an amazing experiment to stick, like, get like 1,000 Apple AirTags and just like dump them into the trash alongside everything else, and watch the sensors just like move around.
yeah, they go somewhere. They definitely go somewhere.
Exactly.
They're not going to remain there from year to year.
Exactly.
But,
It's not perfectly sustainable in that own self-contained way.
yeah, but to me, I think as long as I don't think was obvious to me when I first went there, and through some reading and just experiencing, I think as long as you're honest about what you're doing,
Yeah.
it's fine. And I feel like I even feel this for my own art. I feel like there's something I call the war on fun, which is that when we see what's happening in, I don't need to name anything too topical, but there are humanitarian tragedies happening around the world. There are famines, there are natural disasters, right? I think people are like, okay, how dare you go out and dance when this thing is happening over here, right? And I feel like you can get sucked into this sense of where you like need to be constantly doom scrolling on the internet so that you are fully internalizing all the pain of the world. I'm like, yeah, we could do that. That's you could do that, but I'm not sure that's good. I'm not even sure it's good for the humanitarian crises, right? To have everybody just focus on them in their entirety, right? Like I think you need to be refreshed, and we need to understand like the joy of being alive, and like it's with my more traditional art that I make, right? It's not that not that every piece of street art needs to be a piece of political content, right? Certainly a lot of the giants in the field, like a Banksia or Shepherd Fairey, are very focused on that. But a Futura or a Cause, maybe not so much, right? Maybe they're making things that people find attractive. And maybe it is sort of revolutionary in a way, or edgy, to make people happy, or make things people like, right? Like that, like it feels like that shouldn't be so heretical, but it somehow feels like it is.
I'm Finch. I'm living in Oaxaca right now in Mexico, and like I don't know, but I'm guessing that they're definitely in the top 10 for murals per capita. It's like there's just whole streets where nearly every wall is just covered in these like beautiful Dia de los Muertos paintings, or like all of this stuff. And there's certainly some political stuff, but it's almost like it's just beautiful. I mean, this city is just full of murals, many of them just beautiful things about Mexican culture, or the local culture here in Oaxaca, and it's nice, right? Like, I mean, certainly, I also love to see like a really good, piece providing commentary on something, but, it's also nice to just walk around a neighborhood where like, every wall is just like beautifully covered in art that, doesn't make you, that you don't have to necessarily sit and think about. You can just like enjoy it and be like, that's a really beautiful piece,
Yeah.
Well, we probably ought to move to the more opinion segment. This is the MO podcast, so we've got the more opinion segment. I'm gonna do it first here and just tell people, hey, if you like what you're listening to, be sure to subscribe to our Substack, or follow us on Apple or Spotify. But so the MO podcast, we got the more opinion segment, and we have 3 off the beaten path questions, one of which we prepared you for, but the other 2 not, but maybe you know them because you watched an episode or 2. So Finch, if somebody gave you $10 million to create a project or an enterprise of some kind, you've got 10 million in funding to do something exciting with, what would you do?
Honestly, at some level, it's the friction in my art practice is not about money, right? It's about trying to get. I mean, maybe everything's about money in some way. I guess, yeah, maybe the $10 million I would spend on a team of people who would sit on the phones and call up property owners in every major metro and just go through Google Street View, house to house, building to building, and just go through public records, go to the assessor recorder's office, find every owner, find every mailing address, and just try to get people to agree to have art on their property. Like that's the friction point for me, and I guess I thought that maybe money couldn't solve it, but maybe it could.
Right.
Okay, next question. This is the one we usually prepare people for, just so that you're not on the spot. But is there a project or person doing that's happening right now in the art and cultural sector, whether that's music or film or whatever? Like, is there something else that you're inspired by, or someone else you're inspired by at the moment?
Yeah. So his work isn't very much like mine, but there's an artist named Michael Reeder. And he's based in Texas. And what I like about his work is that he does a lot of like materials experimentation, like concrete or tar, or building boxes into his artwork. He just does like weird stuff that feels to me like some of the pure essence of art, right? Where you're kind of just getting your hands dirty, making things. And he kind of has some set of motifs that he repeats, a skull and so forth. But I think he does some very interesting. Like, yeah, I just saw a piece of his that came up for auction that was literally just poured concrete. I was like, oh, maybe I should do that. That's a good idea.
Cool. We'll have to check it out. Maybe feature a picture of it in the video. That's one of the cool things about this question. We always, we tend to find out about some pretty interesting. That's how we ended up with the whale replica guys on the show, was because somebody else.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear that episode.
We're excited about. It's awesome. An amazing episode. And also Bart's like first installation ever was a couple of live cows in front of a museum. And they ended up traveling with that installation, but you can't take these cows from one place to another because of diseases and things like that. So you have to like partner with different farmers in different cities. And anyways, definitely captive Boomer Collective. Super interesting. This stuff.
It's very Duchamp. Like, if it's not the same shovel, is it the same piece? Right. Like, if it's not the same cows, is it the same work?
Right.
Well,
and you
what,
talked about the way that they interact differently, and and what happens when the cows don't like each other, and and things like that. So there's definitely some weird logistical things that change from location to location.
yeah, but Finch, the really interesting thing about what they've been doing, especially with this whale installation, a lot of it is designed to kind of raise awareness and create curiosity just about ecosystems, climate change, et cetera. But it's not hitting anybody over the head. It's not trying to do any kind of political messaging. They're just doing it in their own specific way. But the fine line that they walk between this kind of like, now what we call kind of misinformation or disinformation, and the reality versus fake discourse, which obviously is being even more pressurized in the age of artificial intelligence, is a super interesting one because it's a very analog project. It's very physical. It's very social, and yet they managed to walk this fine line with not actually lying to anybody, but with but creating an environment that is both absolutely real and also not quite what it seems, which is an interesting liminal space to be occupying.
It's a 50-meter deep fake.
It is that. Yeah.
All right, Fitch. Last question. If you could steal any work of art in the world to have for yourself, but only you and your wife could really enjoy it, you're not allowed to tell anybody else. Nobody could ever know. So it's only for your own personal enjoyment. What piece of work would you like to have for yourself?
So I'm a big fan of Banksy, but I'm not a fan of all of his work. Like any good artist, I guess. And I saw one of his pieces in person at Art Basel that I'd like to steal. And basically, it's his very classic heart balloon, but it was like murdered out. It was like all black. And I was like, that's pretty dope. Like it's both like an iconic work that he does, but it was not the basic one. Like the girl with the balloon is just like a one color balloon luxury art. No, this is there's another version he's done, which is like shaded with spray paint technique, and it's got the Band-Aid on it or whatever, but it's all black. And I was really surprised when I saw it because I'm not like super obsessed with him, but I've been following what he's been doing for years. And the fact that there is a work that he's done that I haven't seen, like that just surprised me. And that made me realize that he has this whole fine art practice of selling paintings quietly to rich people to fund his public art that I just wasn't really aware of. So yeah, that would be a great piece to have. I don't know where it is though.
Nice.
But it was for sale, but I did ask the price, and I think it was like $10 million. And I was like, cool.
What?
That's not really what I buy art for. It was being sold by a very commercial gallery that tends to overprice things anyway. So I'm not sure it's worth $10 million in like an auction setting, but that is what they were asking for it.
What was it on? Was it on
Canvas?
It was on Canvas. Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Finch, thanks for coming on the show. This is super interesting. Yep. Congrats on the Burning project and all of your projects, really. And for all of our listeners out there, FNNCH, check out Fnnch online. And thanks for coming on the pod.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Fnnch.
Right. Bye.
Bye.